Everybody is making videos about waves still. Now, I'm not just trying to surf on the... I'm going to try not to make any bad puns about waves. I can't promise, but I'll do my best. Now, I don't have any personal axe to grind here because I never bought into the waves ecosystem. But I think this whole scenario highlights three very interesting and important aspects of our music software life, which I think will be of interest and hopefully of some small benefit to you as a music software user, assuming you use music software, of course. Now, if you haven't a clue what I'm talking about, I will give you the very briefest of brief explanations. I shall put a little marker in the video when I get to that section so you can skip it. But in addition to these three things I'd like to talk about, later in the video I will point you to a source of free plugins. So if that sounds good, maybe you think it is worthwhile hanging around and watching the video. So here's what's happened. If you're sick and tired of hearing people rabbit on about it and know exactly what's happened, skip to this point in the timeline and join me after the explanation. Waves develops music software plugins. They tend to be of the audio processing variety rather than synths, but they do a whole range of stuff. I think they have around 140 plugins. And up until a week ago, you could buy these individually or in bundles, just as you would buy a plugin from any other developer. A week ago, Waves decided that they were going to make all their plugins available on a subscription-only basis. Now, as a company, they have the right to sell their products any way they wish. However, this new subscription model meant that anyone who had already bought their plugins could not upgrade their software unless they bought into a subscription. As you can imagine, this annoyed an awful lot of people. And such was the anger vented upon Waves by the community, both on YouTube and in forums. After a couple of days, Waves relented and said, "Oops, sorry, we'll get back to the way things were." Now you might think that all would now be well in the Waves world. Waves did put out an apologetic letter, but this didn't fool a lot of people who saw it as the PR exercise it probably was. And the whole experience left such a bad taste in so many users' mouths that the backlash against Waves has been enormous. Now, a contributing factor to this has to be the way Waves actually sold the individual product. You could buy an individual plugin or a bundle of plugins, but if you wanted to get updates, you had to buy into their upgrade policy. So it was sort of like a subscription anyway. You bought the thing once, but then you had to pay every year to get an update. Now, I think this may have affected Mac users more than PC users. When Apple released its new systems, the M1 chip, the M2 chip, the M25 chip, that's for users who live around London in the UK, software would not run natively with these systems. It had to be rewritten. So if you were an Apple user with a new system and who wanted a plugin which worked on the new systems natively, then you had to buy an upgrade plan. Anyway, that's the backstory. If you skipped ahead, welcome back. Now, I never bought into the Waves ecosystem because I didn't like their upgrade plan. It was pretty much like a subscription to me. You know, you had to pay for continual updates, unlike, shall we say, Arturia, who is renowned for updating all its software and its hardware on a regular basis, and as far as I know, these have always been free. But many people did buy into it and use Wave plugins on a regular basis for their music production. Now, Waves was started back in the early 90s, I think. I actually remember reviewing some of Waves' early plugins, particularly an equalizer. There was a series of plugins called the Renaissance series. There was a Renaissance compressor, Renaissance maximizer, and so on. And back then, these were really, really good plugins. What I'm going to tell you now is hearsay, which I got from someone else who was commenting on the Waves upgrade scheme. They reckoned that many of the plugins were not really updated at all. They just stuck another number on the end of the version number and said it was an update. They had rarely added anything new, apparently. And again, according to some sources, some of these plugins have been around for so long that they are no longer cutting edge. Anyway, let's get down to these three things which I think will interest you and which I think are certainly important to the music community. So the first takeaway from this whole scenario, you may think you are a lone voice sitting by yourself in your studio or your room and can do nothing when big companies take action like this, but as has been proved, the voice of the community has had a serious effect on Wave's policy decision. So as a group, as a community, we are not perhaps as powerless as we may think. The second point, and this may be slightly personal, but I have to say again, if you've seen some of my videos, you'll know that I do not like subscription services. I don't like the idea of paying for something again and again and again and not actually owning it. Now, I know this does suit some people, so yes, it's nice to have a choice. And particularly if you are just starting out and have very little money, paying $20 a month, for example, is a good way to try out a whole lot of software. So subscriptions may be a good way to test out pieces of software, but if you're paying $20 a month over a year, for example, you could have probably bought half a dozen pieces of software. But if you stretch this over 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, I don't think it makes good financial sense to keep paying out money and never actually owning anything. Now, some companies do offer a sort of rent to buy policy, or you subscribe to their service and they give you a couple of free plugins. Now, these sort of services may suit some people, and if they suit you, that is fantastic. It's great to have a choice, but personally, and I do think that my views are shared by many people, I don't like the idea, as I said, of paying for something which I don't actually own. Now, a couple of people have actually pointed out that you don't actually own most software. You just have a license to use it. And this is probably mentioned in the small print, you know, before you click the install button to install a piece of software and a license agreement comes up, which we all read, don't we, down to the really small print right at the bottom. So it's probably contained in there somewhere. We don't actually own it, we just get a license to use it. But the better software companies, and I know this applies to Native Instruments, I believe Arturia, allow you to sell or transfer the license to someone else. So to all intents and purposes, if you can sell it, then you actually do own that piece of software. It has also been pointed out that many companies actually do not allow you to transfer the license. You buy it and it is yours, till death do you part. So if you do die, the license dies with you. Is that good? Is that fair? Is that right? I don't think so. I've not actually wanted to pass on any of the stuff that I have bought, so that has not become a practical problem as yet. It may well do in the future. So the slightly worrying thing about subscriptions is that more and more companies seem to be adopting it. Now, it is a very good business model for the businesses. I don't think it's a very good business model for the consumer, for the end user. So if this continues and companies start to ease into a subscription-only model, I think this will be really bad news for users. Whether that will happen or not to any degree remains to be seen. If it does happen, my first port of call will be alternatives, so these companies will absolutely lose my business. And if I am forced to subscribe to anything, I will do so kicking and screaming. That's my views on subscription services. Let me know what you think. And the third thing this whole scenario brings out is that there are alternatives. Now, in some videos, I have seen presenters say that they rely on certain Waves plugins for their workflow. But if you think about it, there are probably thousands of different types of audio processing plugin. And I am fairly sure that in most cases there will be useful alternatives. If you use a piece of software, then you get used to it and it becomes part of your setup. But that is not to say that there are not alternative plugins which do exactly the same thing, perhaps even better, that you could use instead. But I don't know what it's like to get stuck in a groove with a particular plugin. You know it very well, you know exactly what it does, you know how it's going to respond, you know what effect it's going to have on your music, so it's reliable in that sense. So change is not something that we always welcome, but it is possible, and as I say, there are alternatives. There are a number of videos on YouTube which appeared after this Waves fiasco suggesting alternative plugins you could use instead of the Waves plugins. I'll list 3 such videos in the description. Some of these plugins are paid for alternatives, but there are also a lot of free plugins which, according to one presenter, Be The Lick, he's called, link in the description of course, according to him, these plugin alternatives are better in many ways than the Waves plugins he had been using. So check those out if you want a list of free plugins or free alternatives to Waves plugins. So although this whole thing started off as a bad move for customers, I think it has ended up being an even worse move for the company. People seem to be leaving Waves in droves, perhaps not trusting the company quite understandably, and perhaps they're realising that these upgrade fees they've been paying year on year are actually a form of a subscription. So what do you think is the main takeaway from this whole scenario? If you like this video, click the thumb, hit the subscribe button. You know what to do. And if you have enjoyed this video, I think you might enjoy these videos as well. As always, I do appreciate you spending time with me watching my videos. For that, thank you very much indeed. I will see you again in the next one.